We were just teaching how to do buttonholes, both with the automatic foot and the manual foot that comes with the Husqvarna Viking Designer Brilliance 80. But after you sew buttonholes, oftentimes buttons come next. So I'm going to show you the built-in stitch we use to sew the buttons on. And just a little reminder that we do have our Stitching Cosmos online course. So completely done on a Viking. We've used decorative buttonholes with the variegated thread, and we wove ribbon through them. But we are also doing and have a block where we actually do tassels, but then we sew buttons on in place. So fun way to explore. I mean, there's pin tucks, there's circular sewing, there's all the applique stitches, decorative stitches, even ruffler. We feature them all. So check out the links below this YouTube video where you can enroll in this class and truly go beyond your manual and master even more things on your Husqvarna Viking. So we are going to go down to, we're in menu A, and stitch number 41 is to sew buttons on. Now, I don't know if you heard it, but there was a click when I touched that stitch, and that was the feed dogs lowering. So on this machine, if you have it set in the settings, which is the default setting, to automatically lift and lower the feed dogs depending on the stitch you pick, this is one of the stitches that it's designed to lower automatically. Just like when you go over to the embroidery side of this machine, you will also hear that click and the feed dogs are down during embroidery, but as soon as you come back to the sewing side, they will come back and engage. So lowering the foot. Next, speaking of foot, there is no foot recommendation. This is a picture of actually the ankle only being used to sit down on the button and stitch it into place. So that's actually pretty cool. The picture here is with the, here it is, the multi-purpose tool. So should you need to create a shank of thread underneath that button, so when it buttons onto a piece of fabric, it will have that little spacer for you. But if you're just doing decorative, you actually don't use or need any spacing. And speaking of spaces, remember your multi-purpose tool will have a thinner side and a thicker side. So if you are finding that you're working with a much thicker fabric, use the thicker side, and thinner fabric, the thinner side. Okay, next on screen, it's just going to go back and forth. And don't be fooled. I know this picture at stitch number 41 shows 4 holes. My button has 4 holes, but we only do 2 at a time. So back and forth, and then we move, and then do back and forth again. I will recommend that if you do have a 4-holer, that you do the holes closest to you first. That's going to allow for more of the foot to sit down, more real estate for that ankle to sit on your foot as you stitch it. And then you'll come back and then you can stitch. If it's a really small button, you can actually stitch it and then come around and turn the fabric and then stitch it again. So there's lots of different ways depending on buttons. Buttons come in all shapes and sizes. So speaking of sizes, do they really come in different sizes? I mean, how did the machine know how wide to set that up? So traditionally, most buttons are the same cut size. So even though it might be on a bigger button and it looks bigger, if you line it up with a smaller button, it's an optical illusion, and it makes, and they're actually the same. So 4 millimeters is what the machine presets. If you should have a button that has narrower holes closer together, you will be able to adjust it with the stitch width until it was the right size. So just when we go to test it, you'll see me test and then double check that the needle is lined up with the holes before we sew. And then if it's not, then you know to adjust it. Okay, so next step. You'll notice that the needle right now is hanging out more to the left side. So with that, go ahead and set the button on the fabric where you want it to be and hand lower the needle into a left hole. So I'm going to just kind of slide this and bring the needle down in through the button and on a hole that's on the left side, and then manually, or touch the button to lower the presser foot. That's the foot coming down and holding it in place. Let's go ahead and test the swing. So I'm manually, with my hand on the hand wheel, swinging that to the other side. And I can see it went into the hole, so I'm ready to sew. I can go ahead and hit the start stop button. I can sew. If you look at your screen, by the way, you will notice that there's a little 8 times. It went back and forth 8 times. So if you want it to change to be more 10 or 12 times, you can actually adjust the total swings of the needle per hole. And if you want, you could even do a second round, so you could even go back and forth again. There you go. Now that button's going nowhere. And you can use the thread cutter. It will pick a hole and cut. So let's just take a look. We have one set of holes. Look, he's almost smiling at you. Set. Now what we can do is come back and stitch. Now this button has a little ridge. So as I lower down the foot, just make sure that it's got something to sit on. And then I'm testing the swing and pushing start there. If I want to match the double thickness that I had from earlier, we'll just sew it twice and then cut the thread. So super easy. A little fray check goes a long way if you don't ever want to have to stitch buttons on again. And who says you have to only do side to side stitching? You could come back and do this way and make a square. You could also make the width a little wider and even exit, so going diagonal across all the holes. So very fun way to even be a little bit more creative with your sewing on of a button. So try it out. It's kind of fun. It's a built-in stitch. Those feed dogs will come up as soon as I pick a straight stitch and I begin to sew.